Good evening. Welcome to a special show. This is Transgender Awareness Week. It's been a really busy week for me, but I felt I had to come online tonight because it's Transgender Day of Remembrance, and so I want to talk a bit about that and what it all means. So it's a Transgender Day of Remembrance, the 20th of November. And this has been going for quite a time now. This has been going on for over 20 years. The whole of this week, last week, was Transgender Awareness Week. And normally that, I'll be honest, for me, that tends to sort of just pass by. I don't really notice Transgender Awareness Week because being transgender, it's sort of something, it's just happening. But this year has been really huge as a result, I think, of being online and being out doing shows on a regular basis. I've got a lot of attention, seems to have come in. But anyway, just seems a lot of people suddenly decided this is a good time to start doing something about transgender awareness, which is really great. And I've been speaking all over the world, to be perfectly honest, about transgender issues. And I thought I'd just pop in today because it is Transgender Memorial, Transgender Remembrance Day. It's the 20th of November. It's a day to remember those people who have died. But I want to give some background and context to that. So I'm going to share a screen and just have a little look at what this is all about. I'll leave a reasonable screen up there. Let's see if I can find my PowerPoint presentation again. There we go. So let me talk about fear first. Right back when I started doing these shows in September, I talked about fear. It's the huge problem that trans people face a lot of the time. It's what stops so many trans people, not just trans, but LGBT people from coming out, at least that whole issue, which we're going to talk about of covering. And these are the sorts of fears that we all have. So fear of rejection, open spaces. And, you know, if you're watching I'm a Celebrity, you'll be seeing fear in action with people facing awful fears of snakes and spiders and things. But what's the biggest one? What's the greatest fear? Well, I teach public speaking, and for years people have said, that's it, public speaking. That's the number one fear. Lots of research produced lists, and death was about number 7 on the list, way down. Spiders and creepy crawlies, heights, fire, drowning, all those things are much more fearful. So it's more about the way someone dies than actually dying itself. And of course, at the moment with COVID crisis on, fear of death, fear of getting that disease is very high. A lot of people worrying about it. And I'm living in Hull, just on the outskirts of Hull, where we're the most infected place of in the UK at the moment, which is pretty scary. And that's certainly keeping me inside and online for doing my work rather than going out and doing it. But the biggest fear, the big fear that carries with us all of our lives from the moment we're very young. I don't know why it is, but very early on, we pick up this fear of shame. If you've watched Brené Brown's wonderful TED Talk and read any of her material on it, this is the focus of her work. This is a shame. Soldiers in Japan committed harikari after the Second World War because they had shame. They felt shame of having lost the war. Shame is so powerful that it makes families kill their children because they have dishonored the family. So young gay and lesbian and trans people in Muslim countries, in Pakistan, in India, other parts of the world, terrified to come out because if they do, they'll bring shame on their family. And if they bring shame on the family, they're liable to be killed by the family, and an honor killing. But it's not just that. We really do push hard to enforce gender stereotypes, enforce the stereotypes of gender. You must conform to being a man or being a woman, and there's no in between, nowhere in that. And in some countries, that division is so strict, you just cannot cross it. Others, in the UK and in the United States, we've tended to create a sort of blend between the genders now, and that middle ground is getting bigger and bigger, but it still terrifies people. On Monday, I was doing a little talk at a Labour Party group meeting in Bath, and they invited me to go in and speak as someone who was transgender, and I agreed. And the other three speakers were quite young trans men. Now, I grew up in the 1950s and 60s knowing that, if you came out, you were really in for it, because homosexuality was illegal and we all took a really bad time. The police were incredibly homophobic and transphobic. And if you came out, you knew that certainly if you're an adult, you were going to be all across the papers. If you were young, you were probably going to get pushed into some kind of horrific conversion therapy of some kind. Electroconvulsive therapy is the term for it. It was pretty horrific. Fortunately, they never twigged with me. They just thought it was, I was just a little bit ahead of my age mentally. But that shame issue was there all the time. And those gender stereotypes are so ruthlessly enforced. Humiliation. And I may have said this, but I'll tell this story again. A young boy in my class when I was around 7 or 8, in a big family. He was about the middle of 11 kids, and of course ended up with lots of hand-me-down clothes, which would have been great, except for the fact that most of his older siblings were sisters. So he ended up with girls' underwear to have to wear because there wasn't any boys' underwear some of the time. And he'd come to school wearing some girls' knickers, and I think he'd just forgotten it was cross-country running that day. So he's getting changed, and suddenly one of the other boys spotted what he was wearing and started to shout and jeer at him. In seconds, like a scene out of Lord of the Flies, all the boys there were jeering and shouting and laughing, utterly humiliating him. And I was standing there, sort of mixed feelings. On the one hand, I'm thinking, oh my God, he gets to wear girls' clothes. I would have loved to have done that. But when I saw the reaction of these other boys, I thought, no, I can't do that. That has to remain a secret. No one can ever know. So I knew then, right from that early age, that I had to conform to gender stereotypes. I couldn't let anyone know. As I grew older, I got very clear. It became very clear. Yes, career was at stake. My family connections were at stake. Friendships were. Everything was at stake. People did not want you to cross those gender divides. It would have been the end of my career. The problem is that it's not always just the end of career. These are some pretty ruthless trans statistics. 60% of trans people experience hate events. That's a huge quantity. But what's worse is that 97% of the people who had experienced a hate event didn't report it. They didn't report it because they feared that if they did, it would simply fire up more of the same that if you reported somebody from some kind of transphobic experience, shouting some groups, chucking eggs at you, that all would happen would be more and more of the same would happen. Perhaps it would get even worse. Perhaps it would become a bit violent. Perhaps it would mean that they would be outed. Maybe the hate event happened and nobody knew, so they rather keep it that way, that nobody actually knew. 37% of trans people attempt suicide. Now, this figure varies depending upon the research, but this is the sort of the mean figure. But it's higher for young people. About half of young trans people attempt suicide at some point. Now, sometimes it's just a cry for help. I know that, but sometimes it's not. I ran a trans support group for a few years, and we had quite a lot of. We know that we saved the lives of 4 people in the 18 months that we were operating that primary service. And then sadly, all the funding disappeared in 2010. But what's worse is that kids who don't get support from their families are 4 times more likely to self-harm, 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. So these figures don't reflect the reality. The reality is that the kids to get support, actually, it's nothing like 50%. But for those that don't get support, it's more closer to 80. It's closer to 80%. It's a huge, huge problem. And 42% in research back in 2007 said they were too afraid to transition. Well, I did some research for my master's degree about the same time, and I found it was a lot more than that, because that 42% is 42% of those who had the courage to actually engage in some kind of research in the first place. Most were too terrified. And I can tell you, right back when I was young, there's no way I would have even engaged in the research. I was so terrified of it being found out. I knew somehow people would find out, and I couldn't risk that. 90%, this is some research that was recently done in California, 90% of people surveyed, and it was a very big survey, a lot of trans people, thousands of trans people, 90% have been harassed or mistreated at work. The statistics and research done in the UK reflects exactly the same sort of numbers. 47% said they were fired, not hired, or not promoted. And I know when I came out, when I was out in the world, my business came to a standstill. I couldn't tell you whether I was fired or not hired because I was trans, but all of a sudden I didn't get any work. I was still doing the same kind of marketing activities, but just wasn't getting hired. A couple of people who did hire me said, I have had a lot of pressure not to hire you. And it's this fear that they're facing. Oh God, my God, if a trans person messes up, it's why I did my master's degree. I thought if people won't hire me because I'm trans, then I better get qualified in a way that people will hire me because I'm trans. And now, to a degree, that's worked. 33% have had to move because they're trans. Most experience homelessness. So that brings me to Transgender Day of Remembrance, because I'm talking about some of the less, these are not good statistics. I'm talking about trans people take a bad time. COVID has made it worse. Okay. But Transgender Day of Remembrance, this is an international day to remember those people who have died because they're trans. It began with Gwendolyn Ann Smith in November 20th, 1999, in memory of her friend Rita Hessler, killed in 1998, still an unsolved murder. That was one of the first ones. It's just somebody wanted to do a visual remembrance at the end of a year to remember one, and others got into it. And now, if you look at Transgender Day of Remembrance, Trans Lives Matter. It's easy, isn't it? We've had Black Lives Matter, translivesmatter.info, and you'll find lots of information. If you go to GLAAD, GLAAD, you'll find that on their site lots of information. But let me tell you a little tiny bit about this year, just exactly why we're having a day internationally around the world to just remember the people who have died. This is the 2020 statistics. Now, we don't know all the numbers because not all countries did indicate that the person who was killed was transgender. Very difficult to pull that information out. Sometimes it's made clear. But what we do know is that between October 2019, when the last figures were sorted out, and September 2020, 350 trans people or gender diverse people have been murdered that we know about. And you can see that chart is moving upwards. In 2010, it was just under 200. It steadily rose to over 200, and now we're at 350. It started to go down a bit 2014, and I thought maybe it had reached its peak, and for a couple of years it went down, but no, it's still on the up. Trans people are still brutally murdered. Most of them are sex workers, 62%. Most are trans women, 98% are trans women. In the United States, 80% are women of color, trans women of color. We know the same with the statistics on unemployment and various other negative statistics regarding trans people. Everything is 25 to 50% worse if you're a trans woman of color. And that's Hispanic, if you're African American. 50% of those killed in in Europe were migrants, people who've come into the UK, Europe. 38% were in the streets, 22% in someone's own home, where the location is known. That is, average age is 31, the youngest 15. But just look at this. This is the figures over the past 12 years from 2008. 3,664 deaths. The same average statistics are pretty much the same, except that it's nearly 90% when you look at those periods of time that are trans women of color. 73% in Europe, being migrants. So there's a high incidence of it happening to people who are, in the UK, we call it BAME. Some of it's on the highway, some of it on the streets, some in their own residence. Youngest is 6 years old. A little boy beaten to death by his father because he wasn't being manly enough. That's the horrible, horrible truth about these figures. So I'll bring back to me now, because that's the end of that slideshow. I just want you to just think about this. You know, what can you do? How can you do anything about this? Well, the simplest thing is become a trans ally. Yeah, if you see somebody being picked on, if you hear somebody making jokes in the workplace about trans people, picking on somebody who's a trans person, step up, say, hey, that's not okay. I'm not saying put yourself in danger. I'm not saying report it if you see something. If it's too dangerous for you to get engaged, step back. Just make a note, report it, take a picture if you need to. Anyone can report harassment. Anyone can report hate crimes and hate incidents. The police want you to report them. Just phone the non-emergency number. I think it's 101, isn't it? Phone 101, the non-emergency number, and tell people, no, I want to report a hate crime. I want to report someone being harassed. The same will apply if it's black. Same as for someone on their religion, sexism. If anything to do with a protected characteristic. If you see people abusing someone, harassing someone, that should be reported. If you can, step up. If it's in the workplace, just step in and say, hey, that's not appropriate. That's not an appropriate joke. That's not an appropriate question. That's not a good way to treat someone. All we want as trans people is to be included, to get on with our lives as part of the community, part of the workforce, to feel safe coming to work, to bring our whole selves to work, to bring our whole selves into it and do our best as part of a team and feel part of the team. So anything you can do to buddy with a trans person, take their back if someone's actually giving a bit of rubbish. I know that, I never see people making comments on me, but my partner does. Because what happens is if I'm walking along and somebody's making some comments, they will see what's happening behind me. I don't see it. I saw a model the other day had put a phone in her pocket as she walked along to see who was ogling her, who was actually looking at her. And I wonder sometimes if maybe I should do the same, stick a phone in my back pack so I'm walking along and actually record what's happening behind me while I'm walking along so I can see. But maybe I'm too scared. Maybe I don't even want to see what's happening there. But there we go. Transgender Day of Remembrance. It's a day just to remember that trans people every day are being killed, brutally killed, are being attacked, are being treated in an extremely bad way, harassed, simply because they're trans. And that's an awful thing, that somebody is being attacked just because of who they are. And I know it's not just trans people. Yeah, people who are disabled, people who are black, people who are Muslim, all sorts of people with protected characteristics are being treated badly just because of who they are. And that has got to be wrong. And we'll only stop it if the rest of us stand up and say, no, that's not okay. Don't do that. Treat people with dignity and respect. I hope that's been helpful today. I shall be back on Sunday with a bit of a show looking at LGBT history. Please do come along. I had a great workshop on Tuesday. I've been talking about that all through the last month. I haven't quite set the date for next month. There will be another one in December because I've got a lot of people asking, saying, oh, they missed that one. Could there be another? Yes, there will be. Going to be doing trans and non-binary inclusion workshop every month. So that you can pop along for a couple of hours. I'm going to make it a little later in the day so I can actually open it up to people in the United States, because I'm getting a lot of interest from there. Okay, so thank you very much for being with me. Hope you've enjoyed the show. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday and every Sunday and Wednesday. I've got other plans coming up soon, which I will let you know about. But for now, take care. See you soon.